بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد سيدنا الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. So in today's khutbah, I had mentioned something during the khutbah of which the main reference was it was based on Surah Al-Qalam, on the 68th chapter of the Quran. But it really talked more about the first half or the first third of it. And the khutbah was helping us to think about who are we? Do we really understand ourselves? And do we understand the people around us? And do we understand them by the Book of Allah? And so you can take the verse where Allah Ta'ala, for instance, says, what do tudahinu fayudahinun? They would love that you incline to them a little bit, and then they would incline. And then after that, Allah goes on to mention a number of characteristics that the disbelievers, that the kuffar have. First off, He gives the command to the Prophet ﷺ, فَلَا تُطِعِ الْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Don't follow the people who are liars. And so the other part that I had talked about in the Quran, in the khutbah rather, was I'm dismayed to see Muslims tearing each other apart and essentially calling each other a kind of a kafir by calling them a hypocrite, a munafiq, over, one party affiliation or the other. And so one question that I posed during the khutbah, and I wasn't being tongue-in-cheek to be humorous, because that would not be appropriate for the mimbar of the Prophet ﷺ. And so it wasn't tongue-in-cheek, but I wanted to give us something, to think about. And that was, we often, and not just us, I think in this moment, with everything that Israel has done, with this war that is now, as we can see, escalating into a major regional war, not just with Palestine, but with Lebanon and now Iran, is that when we do a genealogy or we dissect, how did this come about? More and more people, Americans and otherwise, are waking up to the fact that the Congress and the lawmakers and the people that get to have their hands on the coffers of the American taxpayer, that they largely have been bought and paid for by organizations like AIPAC, but not only AIPAC, but also by the military-industrial complex. But I said, let's just take AIPAC for instance, that this is a group that has gone through a couple of different transformations. They didn't start off as AIPAC, but to make this concise for this little stream is, if we look at what they did, they are seen as and accused of having bought the Congress. And that's levied against them as a criticism, which it's definitely a worthwhile criticism. But being that things are what they are, and the world not being the perfect place that it is, the question that I posed during the khutbah, right, during the sermon, was, well, why didn't Muslims make their own offer or a counter offer? Because if what people are after, if what they're after is money, I said, I don't think, our community is blessed with extraordinary means. We're blessed with extraordinary means to be able to have quite a bit of financial resources at our disposal. And so my question was, well, if AIPAC could buy, congressional favors or shift foreign and domestic policies, then A, why did we never do that? And still, B, why are we still not attempting to do that? And in my conversation with Brother Dawood and Brother Anis after the khutbah, I said, I'm not trying to be like CNN, and I'm trying to humanize the Zionists. But nonetheless, I do want to try to get inside the mind of the enemy and things that they're doing. And so I said, if you look at the experience of the Jewish diaspora in Europe in particular, and especially in Christendom, right, amongst the lands of Europeans and Christians, they had a certain kind of experience. And that experience came to inform them a great deal of how they would then go forward and deal with the world. And so, as one of my teachers had said, that, if it had ever been the wish of the Muslims to have eliminated the Jews, which is, we're always claimed of being anti-Jewish, if that had ever been like a serious idea amongst the Muslims, there were so many opportunities in history of which the Jews, or at least a major segment of the Jews, were under the authority of Muslims, of which, religious prohibitions aside of us to even do that. Of course, the Prophet ﷺ said that, for the Muslim that unjustly takes the life of one of the people of the book, that he will not smell paradise. That never came about to be. That cannot be said about their experience in Europe and with the Christians. And of course, we know a great component, a great deal of the body of Zionist thought, of course, originated with non-Jews, and like Balfour and these other Christian thinkers always saw the Jew as a problem and sought ways to expel them from their midst. And so they sort of collaborated, and I'm sure most of you will probably be familiar with this, right? My point being is that once they had their experience in Europe and they came to the United States, they saw that they could not settle for mere assimilation. Because if you look at the Jewish diaspora throughout Europe, you could say to a great degree that Jews very much assimilated into European Christian society, whether that be, the way that they dressed, the way that they named themselves to some extent, many of them even trying their hand at converting to Christianity. And yet, when it came for, the violence that was inflicted upon Jews in Europe, assimilation did nothing to protect them from that. And so, where it shows again our need to be students of history is that, again, this is not any attempt to humanize Zionism or Zionists, but just to understand the playbook, is that this time around they saw that they could not rely solely upon assimilation. And I say that because, by and large, Muslims in Europe and in America, so in the West, have largely taken the tactic of attempting to assimilate into Western culture without also trying to put their hand on the levers of the civilization that they live in. And this has fostered and created a kind of situation in which now the Muslims find themselves in the world with no appeal to authority within themselves and almost exclusively outside of themselves. And we were saying how that's going, right? Appealing to Harris or appealing to Biden or appealing to Trump about, what is happening in Lebanon and Palestine, what looks like may going to happen in Iran, will largely fall on deaf and unsympathetic ears. And so I think until Muslims awaken and realize that we cannot solely rely upon assimilation into the culture, even to what maybe some scholars like Dr. Sherman Jackson talk about indigenization, right? So like a sort of a somewhat different trajectory into Western life, which is, you could say the difference between assimilation and indigenization is, the latter process is sort of mostly on your own terms versus on the terms of your host, so to speak. Even with indigenization, I don't think that there can be much of a future as long as Muslims are scared to even think that they should have some type of influence, direct influence on the civilizations that they will live in. And in fact, this is something of, to some degree, this is kind of an oddity in that Muslims have always exerted some type of influence, lesser or greater, in the civilizations in which they inhabited, whether they were within their own backyard in their dominant civilizations or kind of, anywhere else. And so I think what we're seeing now is the limits of assimilation. And so the question I would pose to many of our groups that are out there, and I know that I kind of have a well-deserved reputation for being hard on some of the groups out there that are lobbying on our behalf, whether that's CARE or IMPACT or, any of these other type of groups, is that they still largely seem to be operating under the auspices of assimilation. Not even indigenization, but mainly assimilation. And of course, no form of assimilation can ever allow for the direct engaging of the levers of the society that you live in. And as I was saying to Brother Anis, that if I had lived that same history, I probably might actually wind up with the very same psychology and conclusion of way of thinking. And that is, a lot of people who are immigrants, their first idea isn't, let me go to this new place and start trying to, run the show. That it's more like, keep your head down and, don't try to stir the pot and don't make a whole bunch of sparks. And again, I understand that. That being said, though, it is interesting that this time around that a component of the Jewish diaspora that eventually became the Zionist movement said, no, we can no longer, we will perhaps assimilate to some degree. And so you have certainly seen the secularization of the Jewish diaspora in the community, that they are largely falling away from Judaism as a religion. That being said, though, they are the only way that they saw that they could achieve their goals as Zionists was to have some type of hand on the levers of civilization or government or society. And so I think this is a question that we as Muslims are going to, at some point, have to confront. I mean, I think, and I know that there is a certain, observational value in these different types of schools of thought, like when it comes to things like, colonial studies and decolonization and anti-American military and empire. At the same time, though, I think we have to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, because if you look at, like, what is it that the Rohingya, that the Muslims in China, that the Palestinians, that the Yemeni, like, what is it that these groups, what is it that they need? Sending them food packets even, and may Allah bring, relief and aid to them. As I mentioned, in our conversation, I said, we even have to rely upon the benevolence of the same people that would also be happy to sit back and either watch us be slaughtered in our sleep, or perhaps even do some of the slaughtering ourselves, and rely upon their benevolence to even allow humanitarian aid to reach these people. And so what the Palestinians could use and what the Rohingya could use and what the Muslims in China could use is some hard power, or at the very least, right? I mean, they could use some empire, or at the very least, they could use some type of political interventionism that can only be had perhaps through a way that is not dissimilar to what the Zionists did. And so in the khutbah, that's why I mentioned, if AIPAC was able to buy off the American Congress, and if all it's really about is money, then why didn't we make our own offer? And I still think that that's a question worthy of pondering. So I just wanted to say that in case anybody had a chance to listen to the khutbah or overheard the conversation that Brother Dawood and Anis and I were having after Salah, and just wanted to put it down just as something for us to kick that can around, inshallah, and think of. But going to pray Maghrib, inshallah, and then try to get over to Sheikh Khalid Amin's talk over at the Corona Masjid. So Jazakum Allahu khairan for your time, and we'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum.